So excited about what I get to talk about today. So excited to follow that amazing sermon message, life-changing revelation that we just heard. So excited because I was awake till 2 a.m. last night. And you know, the Bible says that the Lord does not slumber or sleep. I can verify that's true. Because if you're awake, he is very talkative. And I thought, man, either somebody put something in my rooibos tea yesterday or something, whatever that is. My wife said there's no caffeine in that. There's no caffeine in that? That's a lie. Anyway, so I was so jacked up last night. But I was, you know, where do you go when you're in a hotel room and you want to let your wife sleep? You have to go before the throne if the Lord wants to talk. So I literally locked myself in the bathroom and not doing anything. Don't forget it. All the seers don't see right now, okay? But I was just spending some time with the Lord at the throne. You know that's where you get your greatest revelation. Don't tell me that, you know. You think it's the shower? No, it's the other place. So I was taking a whole bunch of notes of what he was saying to me. It didn't make sense then. It makes a little bit more sense now after we heard. So that's good. I think it's going to help us. Let me do this. I just put our resources out now. I had one of our bags come in a little bit late on the plane. So I want to do this. I'm a big believer in that if we're only hearers of the word, not doers of the word, we might learn something, but we never become something. And the way you become something is by actually doing it. And in fact, we can all teach you what we know, and you can learn that, but you can only become what you do. And in fact, you can only reproduce who you are. You can't really reproduce in others what you know. And so truth and revelation that you receive, that's not the end game is to get revelation, it's to become revelation. And that's kind of where I'm going today in the talk. And so the resources that I have back there, and I know Julian has back there, are to help you just to become that. And there's stuff that we've fleshed out in our life, and I can't wait to hear this book that you've fleshed out in your life become a book. It's going to be amazing. But I have a whole prophetic library back there, about 16 hours of teaching on prophecy. I've been teaching on the gift of prophecy for about 15 years. I started just doing in local churches, and then I came into relationship with a ministry called Global Awakening. Has Randy Clark been over here at all in this area? So Randy is just a good friend. He's opened up his school to us. I've taught there from the first year he had his school, and I was just there 2 months ago at the Voice of the Prophets, the annual prophetic conference there, and they told me that the school's 11 years old, so I've been teaching at the school for 11 years, which I didn't want to add up the years, how many that is, a lot of years. I'm getting old. Anyway, so we have 2 schools that actually have taught there. There are 4 CDs each, about 8 or 9 hours on teaching of the gift of prophecy. And I believe prophecy is a New Testament gift for believers. I also believe it should be taught as an Old Testament grace, that there was a grace that comes on individuals when we can learn something from the Old Covenant. I'm not one of these grace guys that throws out the Old Covenant. I actually think that we can see grace in the Old Covenant if we see it through a New Covenant lens. And we heard that beautifully today. The Old Covenant was used to reveal a truth that's been hidden since the foundations of the world, right? And so I believe it should be taught that way, but I think actually prophecy is actually a manifestation of who God is. The Bible says, eagerly desire spiritual gifts, especially. Eagerly desire spiritual gifts, especially. See, I love that. When I go to healing conferences, I always like to point out that verse. Eagerly desire spiritual gifts, especially. You know why? Because it's the best. Anyway, Paul said it, take it up with him. Let me just tell you, there is a difference between gifts. I kind of joke around about it, but it's true. Healing is something that happens instantaneously. When it happens, prophecy is not instantaneous. So healing is sort of like being there at the birth of a baby. You know, it's a boy, it's a girl, it's a shoulder, it's a back. Prophecy is more like raising a teenager. Anybody have teenagers in the room? Yeah, this is how that works. You look at them, you give them all the wisdom and revelation that you have. They look back at you like you're an idiot. 2 years later, they come back to you and said, everything you said is true, you're a genius. Prophetic ministry. Why do I keep coming back? Because I become more of a genius every time I come back. Someone did come up to me today. Last year, you prophesied to me in Cape Town. I didn't want you to prophesy to me. I didn't know you. I didn't really like you. But everything you said come true. You're my best friend now. That's not really what he said, but it was close to that, right? So no, it's really awesome. John Paul Jackson used to say, every prophet's a false prophet until what he says comes true. Deep, right? So if you want to learn how to grow in the gift of prophecy, I have the 2 schools there, and then I have 3 teachings, or 6 teachings, there's 3 CD sets on what to do with you get a prophetic word, how to accelerate into God's timing of your prophetic word if you're behind your time, how your prophecy makes you who you're created to be. It's not just what God's going to do, but what he's making you into. And then how God can use you to create new, your prophecy isn't just for you, but it's actually to pass on for generations. God said to Abraham, I'll make you a father of many nations. And first he had to become a father of one. That took 40 years. But for generations now, we're called the seed of Abraham. Isn't that amazing? So his prophecy, we're still living out. So it keeps giving. So I have these all on CD, but my daughters, who up until yesterday, I had 1 teenager left. Now my youngest turned 20. So I have no teenagers anymore. I was like holding on to that change of life thing. Now it's here upon me. So I'm planning a midlife crisis this year. If anybody wants to buy me a Harley, I'll be... My daughters told me, hey, Dad, CDs are old school. Get rid of the CDs. People don't have CD players anymore. I said, well, what's new school? They said, vinyls. So I'm coming out with a set of prophetic school vinyls next year. Yeah. Put all my, and then for a little extra fee, I'll do like a prophecy with somebody scratching the vinyl in the background. Personalized vinyl prophecy. It'd be awesome. No, until that comes out, we have it on a USB drive. Some people call it a memory stick. We call it a USB drive. Everybody say USB? USB. Because one guy came to the table once and said, can I get that BS drive about prophecy? And I said, no, that's at Julian's table. That's good. Sorry, he's not even here. It would be better if he was here, you know? Don't worry, I can dish it out, but I can definitely take it. My wife takes it better than me, though, so dish it out to her. Just kidding, she's amazing. By the way, that was my wife, Kimberly, up there. My little blonde hair, blue-eyed pastor's daughter, who's a lioness in worship and just brings the presence of God everywhere we go. So that's why I love bringing her everywhere I go. Leanne said, Kim, I'm glad you come with Bob. He's much happier when you're with him. The first 2 years, I must have been angry or something. I was like, I don't think I'm angry. I don't know if I should say this or not, but I'm already in. My daughters call it my resting prophetic face. I know there's another phrase for that, but you guys can figure that out later on. Okay. Moving along, I have a book about how to hear God's voice. It's called The Roar, and it's actually from Genesis 3. It's the first place we hear the sound of God in the cool of the day, or the ruah, the spirit of the day. Man had sinned, and it created an atmosphere, a spirit, the cool of the day. The atmosphere was sin, and God's voice came with a roar, and it said, Adam, where are you? Which means that whenever there's an atmosphere or spirit of the day, there's a principality of the day, there's a sound from heaven that roars to shift the atmosphere, right? And it's always an atmosphere that draws people back to God, doesn't push them back behind shame and fear. And so this actually goes through Genesis 1-3 and talks about different ways that God speaks. There's a study guide here that goes through, there's 9 different chapters. And for each chapter, there's study guide questions every day, scriptures every day to hear God's voice in a different way. And then 4 exercises that you can do to hear God's voice for yourself and for others. And so we have a lot of churches that go through this, use it as a prophetic curriculum, small groups that go through it. So if I can get inside of your head every day for 9 weeks, I could do some damage. So I would like to. And then my last book, and this is what we're going to kind of talk about today. It's called Think Like Heaven. Change your thinking, change your world. I told the publishers I wanted to subtitle it, Think Like Heaven, Don't Stink Like Hell. they didn't think that would be very marketable. So it's really a book. It's a practical seer book, but it talks about what heaven is. I love the way Julian unpacked that for us. Heaven isn't a place that we go after we die. It's actually a place that was created so earth can interact with it. And God created the heavens and the earth, and then he put man on the earth to never die. Man would have never died if he wouldn't have eaten the tree. Why would he create heaven if man was never created to die? Because it was the place where God was going to interact with man. And you can still interact with God from heaven. And it talks about what heaven is. And actually, one of the best descriptions of heaven came from a Reformed theologian from Gordon Conwell Seminary. His name's Meredith Kline. Way too smart for me to even read it. I had to read like the paragraph 3 times to understand it. But he says this: heaven is, he's actually an ancient Canaanite covenantal theologian. That's what he studied, Canaanite covenantal theology. And here's what he said: heaven is not, it doesn't exist out there. It's actually on the same plane as earth in a different dimension. I'm like, that's a prophetic conference right there. So I just talk about how we can access that realm, and then when we do, what's available to us. And a lot of the things we've been talking about, Renaissance, is in here. But let me just give you one little thing. There's a scientific study that about 50% of the time that you're awake, that you daydream. It's true. That's not a joke. Like 50% of the time that you're awake, your mind is somewhere else. Some of you, it's like 75%. But when you're daydreaming, parts of your brain are communicating that never communicated any other time. It's completely creative, and it bypasses a lot of your logical thinking. And so I believe sometimes when you daydream, you're actually having ideas from God. The Bible says that there's some thoughts we need to cast away vain imaginations. There's other thoughts we need to take capture. I believe that there's some thoughts you push away, you're supposed to capture them. And there's a story of a man, a Christian man, went to church one day. He was daydreaming while the pastor was preaching because there was a problem in his business, and he came up with an idea to solve it. He developed a product called Post-it notes. You ever hear of them? $1 billion product invented in church while daydreaming. Just saying, if you happen to daydream while I'm preaching and invent a $1 billion product. Bethel's building a really big building and really need some help. Just want to give a shout out for that, right? Arise and build, all right? So awesome. Great to be with you guys. Thanks again, George and Leanne, for having us back. And we're here this weekend, right? Yeah. So we're going to be hanging around with you guys on Sunday. You might be tired of us by then. Eric, great hanging out with you. Thank you for bringing the wisdom that you brought. And of course, you guys, just love the way you guys are you. I don't even want to define what that is, because you're not a copy, you're an original. So isn't that so cool? And thank you for your boldness and humility today. Rare combination. And in fact, it's kind of what I want to talk to you about. So I'm going to try to follow that talk, and I think this is what the Lord told me. At least this is what I felt like he was telling me at 2:00 a.m. last night. And sometimes what the Lord says at 2 a.m. doesn't sound so great at 12:19. But first of all, let's go to James, and I want to go there, and I want to show you something from the life of Jesus. I'm going to call this a personal renaissance. And I'm sorry that I can't say it the South African way, because it's so much cooler the way they say it, isn't it? It's Renaissance. Still, I'm going to say Renaissance because I'm butchering it, but you guys say it much cooler than we do. Let's go to James chapter 3. And we're just going to look at verse 13, 14, and 15. I'm going to read from the New King James Version because I've read from different versions, went back to the original language, and just in the short period of time that I've got, and literally we're talking about less than 12 hours ago, so forgive me if it's not well processed. I'm just going to do my best to be revelatory and hope that all comes out good. But I did see that it's a little bit closer to accurate in the New King James Version. So I'll pick out a few words. Let's do this. So we've been talking about wisdom, how part of Renaissance is for God to make his manifold wisdom known to principalities and powers. And that was the first message of the first night. By the way, did you hear a lot of overlapping between a lot of the messages? I mean, Genesis 1. I've preached out Genesis 1 for the last 20 years, and I never heard a couple of things she said. How God made space for everything, and then he filled it. And isn't it cool how he made space for himself? And it was for Adam and Eve, and he just filled them with him. I love that. So Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in meekness. Everybody say meekness. In the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic. We've been talking about how change and transformation first comes by a change of thinking. And if we're going to change the culture, we first have to change ourselves. Like, we have to have a personal renaissance if we're going to see a cultural renaissance. We don't just need revelation. We actually need for the revelation, for the word to become flesh in us. Jesus became the light of the world because the word became flesh. And I love if you take Genesis 1 and John 1, or even Genesis 1 through 3 and John 1 through 3. It's a beautiful description. In fact, some commentators call John 1 through 3 the 8 days of the second creation. It's a beautiful concept. If you put in juxtaposition those two passages, John 1 and Genesis 1. And in Genesis 1, you have Jesus declaring, "Let there be light," and creating things from the unseen to the seen realm. And then in John 1, it says, "And the word became flesh." So the word became flesh. The word that wasn't seen became flesh, and it dwelled among men. And when that happened, he became the light of the world. So light came into the world when the revelation became manifest in flesh. It was then able to light up the world. So when the revelation became flesh, when the word became flesh, it became the light of the world. How many have a word for your life? How many heard a word this weekend? How many got some revelation this weekend? Let me tell you something. You don't change the world by getting a revelation. You change the world by becoming a revelation. When the word becomes flesh, it becomes the light of the world. And it's very important because, especially when we go to process new things in revelation, when God is making himself known to thought processes in the earth, to principalities and powers, that we've lived under mindsets, groupthink for generations, and it could be something simple. Like, I grew up in a white, blue-collar, lower middle class, probably closer to lower class family. In America, I know you think everybody has a lot, and I understand that the resources even of the lowest class in America probably are better than people around the world, but we ate government cheese, we had government milk, I wore hand-me-downs, and I wore like, hand-me-downs are, right? Clothes that are passed down. And that's really scary because I was actually the first boy. I had 3 sisters before me, so. Actually, my mom went to the thrift store and bought me somebody else's hand-me-downs. Thank God for that. Because then we'd have to deal with more than just a poverty spirit. There'd be a few more spirits that I had to deal with. My grandfather worked in a steel factory. My father worked in a steel factory, worked hard all their life, retired with very little. Nobody in my family went to college. Out of 5 children, my brother did finish 2 years of college. No one else in my family did. It was the only one that even went to college, paid my own way through. Just the Lord helped, and it was cool stories behind that. Most of my family lives and still lives in the same town I grew up. None of them have traveled outside of the country. What changed wasn't what God said about me. What changed was what I believed about what God said about me. And so the word has to become flesh before it can change the world around you. Now, this is talking about wisdom, and check out verse 15. It says that there's 4 kinds of wisdom. 2 come from one plane or dimension, and 2 come from another dimension. He says this wisdom does not descend from above, which means that there is a wisdom that descends from above. So there's a heavenly wisdom, right? In fact, the first part of James talks about that. It says, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him. Isn't that good? All you have to do is, you said, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him. I wanted you to say it again because you said ask. And it warmed my heart for a second, because The whole time that Kadia's teaching, like what she's saying is really smart, but she could say anything and she sounds smart with that accent. And she's like, I'm sorry, I don't know if that's nationalistic, racist, I don't know what that, gender, I'm not sure what I offended there, but all I'm saying is, I wish I had a British accent. That's all I'm gonna say, okay? So let him ask. Oh. Did I swear? Did I say it wrong? Almost, it was really close. I know it was really close. Like, what did he just say? Did he say os? You see, but what I found out is British preachers can say os. They can say, like Graham Cook, he swears. And so anyway, sorry, this is terrible. I am getting in so much trouble today. But look at verse 14. If you have bitter envy, self-seeking in your heart, do not boast or lie against the truth. This wisdom does not come from above, which means that when we process revelation, we have to also process our hearts first. And to show that to you, just go back to the beginning of the chapter of James 3 there, because it talks about teachers. So now I want to first talk about the teachers, and I want to talk about the learners, since I'm a teacher and a learner. Verse 1, my brothers, do not let many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in the word, he is a perfect man, able to also bridle the whole body. The word stumble, it sounds like it's saying that, hey, if you get the word perfect, then you can teach other people. If you got to get it right. And if you don't get it right, then don't teach other people. That's not what it's saying. The word stumble there means to be offended. What it means is, if you can let the word come into your heart and not let it offend you, then you're mastering something and you're being given authority. So offense at revelation will actually diminish your authority. And he goes on to say, and he talks about bridling horses and bridling animals and bridling ships. It's all about authority. And he's making the point that when you become offended, you lose your authority. You lose your authority as a teacher, but you also lose your authority as a learner. And he's putting that in the context now of wisdom. And he says, who is wise among you and understanding? Let him show good conduct, that his works are done with meekness. What does the Bible say? The meek shall inherit. So meekness in receiving revelation gives you the authority to administer that revelation over the earth. The meek shall inherit the earth. And if you become offended, it diminishes your authority to administer that revelation to the world around you. The reason I'm saying that is because it's natural to be offended when we learn something new. Yeah. It's natural. The disciples were offended. The Pharisees were offended. It's natural because in order to have your opinion changed, your opinion needs to be offended. Because your opinion is not revelation. But I will show you later, your opinion is important. I don't believe that you should say your opinion doesn't count to someone. Because your opinion is your truth. And your opinion is your reality. Your opinion is where you're living. And it's important to validate people's opinions. Some of what I heard this weekend challenged my opinions. And guess what? I get to go in meekness and examine the word. I get to go in meek, and meekness is not weakness. Meekness is a place of authority. And so what he's saying is, if you don't operate in meekness, when you receive wisdom, when you see revelation, you put yourself in a position where now you're relying on earthly wisdom. A wisdom that comes from the flesh, a wisdom that comes from your experience, a wisdom that comes from your culture. Then, if you submit to that, it starts to diminish to a wisdom that goes with your feelings, because now it's not just the common experience of people, and this is common sense, this is common wisdom, but now I feel like this is right, so it must be right. because that offended me and that hurt me and that doesn't feel good. So I want the truth that makes me feel good. That's called sensual wisdom. It pleases my senses. It feels good to me. And if you submit to that, then he says it becomes demonic. So now we have the opposite of revelation. We have wisdom that's earthly, wisdom that becomes sensual, wisdom that becomes demonic. Which means that if I allow my heart to be offended by truth, what I'm going to do is start to live out of the flesh, then out of my feelings, and eventually I'll wind up in a deception that I don't even know is a demonic mindset in the earth, that I'm living under a stronghold. You hear what I'm saying? And the good news is this: the antidote is just to have meekness. It's just to say, yes, God, I receive your truth. Now show me what's true. And I want to show you that in Jesus, because Jesus showed his disciples how to receive revelation and what to do with it when he received it. And here's my concern. And even last night as I was just praying, what can I share? I felt like there was just so much. And I go to a lot of conferences. This is one of the meatiest conferences. Like literally, like I ate a steak last night. That was so good. I went back to my room just to freshen up for 5 minutes. I laid down. That was a mistake. Because I'm like, oh, that meat is so good. And the Lord's like, walk it off. Here's what I want to say. You guys need to take the meat you got and start walking it out. Otherwise, you're just going to get bloated and constipated, all right? And then you're going to go back. You're going to take a laxative, go back to your church, and make a mess. That's what I'm saying. I'm sorry. I'm a boy. I'm a male. I like bathroom humor, okay? Sorry. See, Eric, we can't do that at home with the girls, right? All right. So this wisdom does not descend from above, but it's earthly, sensual, demonic. But meekness allows us to access wisdom that descends from above. And that's what I want to show you next. Go to Matthew 16. Okay. Is this okay? You guys all right? Okay. I feel like I'm a little bit making this up as I go along, but anyway, maybe it's better. A way you can process it. I want you to be able to process it. That's really the thing here, is that if we just receive but we don't become, we just miss an opportunity. And I really feel like I'm challenged to become something out of this weekend. Really, I'm challenged. And I try to be challenged everywhere I go, but this is really good stuff. So I'm really honored to be part of this today. It's just been really good this weekend. So Matthew 16, let's go to verse 13. And I want to give you, I'm going to give you the process for reformational or Renaissance thinking. I call it transformational thinking, but for personal renaissance and having a renaissance in your thinking. And there's three processes Jesus walks his disciples through. And it's important to understand this, that Jesus is about to leave. And he's demonstrated heaven on earth for 3 years or however long he's been with his disciples. And he isn't going to be around to demonstrate it any longer. So he needs them to now have the word become flesh in them so they can become the light of the world. All right? So he's actually reproducing his process of him becoming, the word becoming flesh, and then walking into darkness and becoming the light of the world. He's reproducing that process in them. And it's important because there's some things that in the church world that we try to short circuit the process to get people to truth, and we keep pounding them with truth, but we don't let them come through the process. And what we have to understand with all of the things that we've been challenged with, and you guys have different cultural issues here in South Africa than we have. So we would view classism differently there, but we have it. We would view racism differently there, but we have it. We have different, offenses in our culture, and we have different opinions in our culture. And so, but what I'm saying is that there's a process that people have to go through to come through truth. You can't just shine a light in their eyes and they can see. The brighter you shine the light in their eyes, you blind them. And so you need to help people walk into truth. And Jesus was a genius at this. So let's just read these couple verses. Verse 13, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked, who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I still like it in the King James. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus goes on and he says this, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And then he goes on to this great promise about Peter and about the church and about what would happen. But in verse 20, he says this, then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. It's interesting, right? Let me just walk you through a process, 3 steps to Renaissance thinking, to transformational thinking. The first one is that Jesus asked them a question. Who do people say that I am? And their response is actually the opinion of others. Everybody say opinion. So I think opinion is important. In fact, Jesus said, who do people say that I am? And the response is important because the response tells us that the people were moving past earthly wisdom. Because the response was, some people say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Jeremiah or Elijah, right? And so they're not saying the earthly wisdom stuff, which the earthly wisdom was what some people say you're illegitimate child. That was known. That was a known rumor about Jesus. Some people just say you're from Nazareth. Nothing good comes from there. That would be earthly thinking, right? So they're actually moving past earthly thinking, and they're starting to move into the realm of revelatory thinking, but they're still operating in opinion, which Jesus doesn't actually correct. If it were me, I would probably say something like, yeah, those people are idiots. I mean, okay, Elijah and Jeremiah, I can maybe, justify that. But John the Baptist, that's his cousin, who's only a few months older than him, who actually had his head chopped off a few months before he asked this question. And people are saying, you're John the Baptist, come back. The guy who baptized you, who smells like camel and has honey in his beard. And actually, if I were Jesus, I probably would have said, yeah, you could have picked any one of my relatives and I would have been happier than John the Baptist. He's crazy. Crazy cousin John. Jesus wouldn't have said that. I would have said that. So, but here's what we have is that on your way to revelation, you're allowed to ask questions. And you're allowed to be wrong. And you're allowed to have an opinion. As long as your opinion is not rooted in offense or doesn't lead you to offense, it's going to lead you to truth. But your opinion that becomes offended by truth will actually diminish your authority and keep you from being the light of the world, keep you from having the keys to the kingdom, keep you from binding on earth what's bound in heaven and loosing on earth what's loosed in heaven, which is what comes after revelation. And so what we're looking for is that authority to bind on earth what's bound in heaven and loose on earth what's loosed in heaven. And that only comes with revelation that comes from above. We're not there yet, but Jesus' response to what the disciples' opinions, other people's opinions are, is important. Let's look at what his response is. But what do you say? Which means Jesus had no response. Which means you don't have to respond to people's opinions. You don't have to argue with people about their opinions. You don't have to prove that they're wrong. You don't have to prove you're right, because that's not revelation, that's offense. That's not meekness, that's offense. And Jesus is operating in meekness by just being quiet. Peaceful, let's call it. We learned that quietness is peaceful. That was one of my opinions that got changed. That was good. And so he asked them a different question. He said, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? This is where I always imagine that awkward silence. Like when you're in middle school and the teacher asks a question and there's that awkward silence. Nobody wants to answer except the really smart kid in the front who's like raising his hand for every question. The teacher's like, anyone else except for Peter, please? Peter, I know you can walk on water. Peter, I know you can raise the dead. Peter, we know you know everything. Hey, what's that guy's name? Bartholomew? Are you even a disciple? Is there a disciple called Bartholomew? Okay, Peter. He finally picks on Peter, and Peter comes up with the answer. Well, what's Jesus doing here is actually, he's asking them what's their belief or their feeling. What's their conviction? See, opinions usually come from our environment, from the culture we live in. So my opinion about race is formed partly because of my environment. I go to a church that's 50 to 60% Black, African American, we say in America, but that's not what you say, but that's what we say, we're good. 20% Latin Americans are Spanish descent, and about 30% Caucasian. We're very multicultural. So I like to have conversations because I don't know what it's like to drive down the road and to be racially profiled by a police officer and to be pulled over because maybe I was doing something wrong or maybe they just didn't know. And I didn't even know if that was real stuff or if that was stuff that was made up by people. So I asked the question, have you ever had this happen? Why? Because your opinion is formed out of your environment. And you need to understand other people's environment in order to value their opinion. And to understand that their opinion, even if it's different from you, is important. Let's make it something that's not as controversial as this. How about that? Football. Because sports are not controversial, are they? Like, are you a 49ers fan? He's a 49ers fan, San Francisco 49ers. Sorry to use an American cultural reference, but it's my sermon, so I will. And so, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. We won the world championship. I know, I was using this sermon to bring this up. So, his team did not win the championship. However, they got a really good quarterback, and they're going to do well this year. And I actually like the 49ers. I have no problem. I don't really have an alternate opinion to him. His opinion is a yes for him, and my opinion is a yes for me. Now, we should all agree that Dallas Cowboy fans are wrong. Absolutely. You agree? Amen. You see that? So that's wisdom that comes from above. It's awesome. That's what I'm showing you here. Okay, so that means that opinions aren't necessarily right or wrong. They're based upon someone's environment and what they've been. Does that make sense? And Jesus wants us to get past that to revelation. But he actually doesn't bypass your experience and your opinion to get you to revelation. He values it, or at least he doesn't diminish it. He doesn't say they're wrong, they're stupid. Why? Because he values the person. And so we as teachers want to value the person, but we also as learners want to value the teacher's experience and revelation. Okay. Secondly, he brings them into conviction, which is a feeling, and convictions and feelings are based upon experience. Now, what I like about this is the Holy Spirit gave me 4 E's that we're going to use. So environment and experience. This is when he says, who do you say that I am? And you know what? It's good to have an opinion as long as it doesn't offend you. And it's good to have a conviction as long as it doesn't lead you to judgment. And so Jesus wasn't looking to make a judgment call, who do you say that I am, and looking for them to get it right or wrong. He was actually trying to get them to think differently than that earthly thinking. He's trying to pull them into a new place. And so sometimes when God brings us new revelation, he raises new questions for us. And a conversation like this, in fact, the prophetic, for me, it's more important not the answers that it gives, but the questions that it raises. In fact, that's exactly the way it works for me. I don't know anyone else here, but whenever God speaks to me, my first response usually is, what? Because when he speaks, he doesn't always speak clearly, because he's not trying to give you an answer. He's trying to lead you into a conversation that you can ask questions you've never asked before. Because if he gave you the answer, then you'd stop talking to him. Prophecy isn't God telling you something, it's God talking to you, and it's supposed to start a conversation. Which is why we come and let you do the work later. That's not our job. We're going to prophesy revival, and then you got to do the work, man. Come on. Here's the deal, is that your conviction or your feeling comes from your experience, and God values your experience, but he wants to take you beyond your experience. And you can have an opinion as long as it doesn't lead you to offense, and you can have a conviction as long as it doesn't lead you to judgment. And what's the difference here? The difference is that when it comes to politics, everybody has an opinion. And especially in America, and everybody outside of America has an opinion about American politics, especially last couple years in November. And I was like, I think I'm going to not schedule any more international trips until after the elections. So what's your opinion about so-and-so? What the proper response was, I don't have an opinion, I'm a prophet. No, that's like saying I'm not a person, I'm a prophet. That's stupid. I have an opinion, but I have to get past my opinion, because sometimes my opinion will affect the revelation I need to get. And by the way, I don't always vote my revelation. Sometimes I just vote my conviction. So conviction is really important because, and then we're going to get to the reason why, because what you do with revelation is important to understand the difference between having an opinion, a conviction about what truth is, and then a revelation about truth, is because that your assignment has to go beyond your opinion and your convictions. Your assignment has to go beyond your opinion, your environment, and your experience, okay? And it has to lead you to another place. It's called encounter. That's where revelation comes. And here's what Peter says. You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. And if I were Jesus, the teacher, I'd high-five that kid. I'd say, yes, Peter, you got it right. And Jesus kind of does that. He says, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Now, if you're from the South in the United States, they say, if you say, bless you, bless your soul, bless your heart. Yeah, bless your heart. It's actually saying, oh, you're really stupid, but nice try. Oh, bless your heart, you little idiot. No. He said, blessed are you, Simon, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood. It's not earthly, but it came from my Father in heaven. If you're going to say it the Northeast way, he's saying, hey, Peter, good job, but you're not smart enough to have figured that one out on your own. And I actually cleaned that up a little bit. If I was from the Bronx, I'd say, Peter, you're too stupid to have gotten that one on your own. The Father had to give it to you directly. Here's what he's saying. He congratulated Peter. He celebrated Peter for getting something that was a gift. Peter didn't figure, you're awesome, because there's no way you could have figured that out. That had to come through relationship with the Father. And so Jesus wants to draw us into a place where we get stuff we can't get from our experience or from our environment. It can only come from an encounter. And when we have this encounter, what happens is we get wisdom that comes from above. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father has. And they had to get past the offense of other people's opinions and the judgments that they had made because of their convictions to get to a place where they could hear from the Father. And what I love about what we've received is that we're getting the chance to bypass our opinions and our convictions and come to a place of revelation. And what we do with it is super important, because what you do with it will determine the authority that you have. Because the revelation comes, the word becomes flesh, so you can become the light of the world. It wants to light up the world. And so this word had to become flesh in them. It's not just enough for them to know who Jesus is. They have to flesh it out in their life. The proof in it isn't going to come from what they proclaim. The proof in it is the person they become because of the truth. And the truth of revelation isn't truth just because you heard it or you received it, but what you become because of it. And when you become it, that's the proof that it's true in your life. And so before you proclaim it, live it. Before you write it, become it. Because that's really what we're trying to do, is become the Word. And when we do, the Word becomes flesh, and it brings light to people around us. And they say, well, I want that in my life. I want that light in my life. You can have that light, and you can become that too. Now walk it out. And so he tells them what it's going to look like when it becomes light in their life. He said, oh, man, you guys, I'm telling you, God, I'm going to build my church on this. And some people say, well, he's saying, I'm going to build my church on Peter. Because he said, Simon, now you're going to become Peter, and I'm going to build my church on this. I actually think that there's a truth to that, because there's a manifold wisdom in the scriptures. And I believe he is saying, Peter, you just became a foundational stone in the church. Because of that, you're going to be an apostolic building stone that I can help build my church on. I don't have any problem with that teaching. But I also believe there's something else. There's some people that say, he's saying, no, the church is going to be built on the revelation of who Jesus is. He's the Son of the living God. I think that's true as well, because revelation is multi-layered. That's where, when you get past your opinion, you can get to the yes and stage. It's not either or. Well, it's not Peter being an apostle, and it's not the revelation of who Jesus is. Yes, it is, and yes, it is. I'm trying to teach our team this because creativity is stifled when you have an environment of everything is known, everything is certain, everything is in concrete, and we have to embrace uncertainty. We have to embrace the unknown because it's in the place of uncertainty that hope is created. It's the place of not knowing what the future is that we can create a new expectation of the future. And so the seed of hope is always planted in the soil of uncertainty. And when faith causes it to spring up into the seen realm, then we realize what we've only hoped for. And then the place of the unknown is where creativity is maximized, because if you're just building on an artist painting, that's not really creativity. Creativity comes when you got a blank canvas. Creativity comes when you got a page is sitting in front of your face and there's no music notes on it, but something sparks. Creativity comes when C.S. Lewis said, when I wrote Narnia, it's all because I saw a lion run through the back of my head, and I wrote the story of Aslan because of one, in a blank slate, in a blank brain came a lion. I love that. And so what we have to do is we have to come back in. That's why Jesus said to come into the kingdom, you have to become a child. A child doesn't have to know, so whatever you tell them, it's true. You can fly. Yes, I can fly. That towel, put it around your neck, you'll become Superman. And I did that too, ran around my yard. Why? Because creativity is maximized in a place where it's the unknown. And so many of it, and the church is in this place of transition where we have uncertainty and we want to make it certain. No, uncertainty creates hope. We want to know what the future's going to be. No, I don't want to know it. I want to create it. I want to have creativity. And so we're doing this with our team. We're doing this with our kids. We're learning whenever they give us an opinion. We don't say, yeah, but this. We say, yes, and this. Why? Because we want to validate where they are so we could help them to go where they're going. Yes, that's true. And how about this as well? And that's really what we're seeing here is he's saying, on this rock I'll build my church. Yes, on you, Peter. Yes, on the revelation of Jesus. But yes to this as well. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. And on this rock, what's the rock? Receiving revelation from heaven. On this rock, I'll build my church. Wisdom that comes from above will be made manifest through the church to principalities and powers. It will shift the groupthink over the culture. And so on this rock, I'll build my church. Revelation. Everybody say revelation. So revelation doesn't come from your experience. It doesn't come from, what was that other E? It was a really good one. Yeah, your environment. Thanks. It's in here. I'm getting to the place where I got to make the font bigger on my iPhone, but I'm refusing to. I'm like, no, in Jesus' name. The big iPhones came out just in time for me to get readers, So I was like, I don't have to have my paper Bible with readers. I could just make the font bigger. That's all right. I call them my Clark Kent glasses. That's what they are. So revelation, it comes from encounter. And revelation can be obscured whenever your opinion leads you to offense or your conviction leads you to judgment. You'll actually begin to shift, and what God meant to be revelation that would set people free, truth that sets people free, actually leads them into a place of bondage. It can be obscured. And sometimes there's even a mixture in us because it's like, we know this is revelation from God, but it's still coming through a pain of my experience. Yeah. And so I know this is true, but I know I'm processing it through this thing. God's totally okay with it. And you know what? I'm okay with it too, because God loves us where we are. He loved Peter where he is. Peter, good job. And by, I think, extending that blessing to Peter, he was actually extending the blessing to the rest of the disciples. On this rock, I'll build my whole church. You guys can get this too, right? And so, our opinion comes from our environment, conviction comes from experience, revelation comes from an encounter, and then Jesus leads them to this. And this is really what I want to leave you with. I think it's super important. The reason is your assignment is not to go around and tell people your new revelation. Your assignment is to become, for the word to become flesh. Your assignment is to go live it. I can lay hands on the sick and they can recover. I'm going to go back to my church and I'm going to tell everyone how to just go and lay hands on the sick. And if they recover, people will ask you. And it's much better to be asked. You know, there's something in the culture we live in. We've lost the value of hiddenness. And it's so much part of the process of maturity. You know, David slayed the lion and bear while no one was looking around, and that's what gave him the authority to slay Goliath when everybody was looking. Now, because it's not because of the generation. It's not the millennial generation. It's the way that we're growing up, that everything's public and permanent. Not just public, it's permanent. Which means when people see you, they see you that way all the time. And you know, there's something the Lord told me early on in ministry. He said, Bob, don't reveal yourself to people before your time. Because if Jesus didn't reveal himself to people before his time, because if he revealed himself, they would always see him as at that stage of his life. That's why his mother had to get over him being his son. That's why his brothers had to get over trying to get him to come back home. He said, who's my mother, who's my brothers? The ones who do the will of my Father in heaven. They tried to track with him in a stage of his life he wasn't in anymore and bring him back to it. And he said, I'm just going to keep being what my Father said I am. He didn't get offended by it. And guess what? Mary was the last one at the cross. James became the head of the church. It all worked out in the end. Sometimes people won't recognize you, and sometimes the people closest to you will be the last to recognize you. But if you just keep being who you are, let the word become flesh, when they discover you, they'll discover you at full maturity. Because if people discover you when you become mature, if you reveal yourself to a person that is supposed to meet you here because what you have in your life at this point in your life is what they need right now, and you reveal yourself to them here, you're not that person yet. You don't have that thing in your life. You haven't actually fulfilled what God's called them to fulfill. Now they have to overcome that. They have to get over your immaturity in order to receive the gift that God's put inside of you. And so let people discover you, because God's put a gift in you that's worth hiding. He's put a gift in you that's worth bringing to maturity. And so Jesus comes to his disciples, and here's what he says in verse 20. After he says all this stuff, then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Oh, it's like my team just won the game, and I can't, well, I did tell you, right? I can't celebrate that I just, got a new car. I can't tell people this great victory. You don't have to Instagram every healing that you experience. And just don't have to. In fact, here's what I think personally. I just leave a little bit in the bank of eternity. Because Jesus said, if you do everything you do for men to see you, that's your reward. That's okay. It's a good reward. People clap for you, and it's good. But if you do stuff in secret, the Father rewards it publicly. And guess what? There's a great reward for you in heaven. So I just tell my students at Global, I say, hey guys, keep a couple things in the bank of eternity. Don't tell people some really cool miracles. Just keep them between you and God. When you get up top, he's going to be like, yeah, that was a good one. We were there together. Nobody else saw it, but it was amazing. Why not? Why not? That really proves you believe who you really are. And you don't have to prove who you are if you know who you are, right? And so he's just saying to them, look, guys, don't tell anybody who I am. The reason is, once they became what they were going to become, because Jesus was the Son of the living God, and he was resurrected, and they became, and the Spirit came back into them. Jesus breathed on them, and they came to the day of Pentecost, and the Spirit descended on them. They became something that people didn't even have to say anymore. They're just like, Jesus is real because these guys are different. Right? Maybe you take this revelation and your marriage becomes different, and people say, what's different about your marriage? Maybe you take this revelation and you start treating people of different skin color or different classes, whatever that is, differently. You practice equality, and people say, what's different about you? You practice generosity, and people say, what's different about you? You see, when the word becomes flesh, it becomes contagious. Light just shines. And I think this is one of the greatest ways that we can process revelation. Just walk it out. Because to be honest with you, otherwise, you have a choice to become offended, you have a choice to become judgmental, or you have a choice to just become overwhelmed. Like, I can't do all this stuff. Like, this is too much unlearning and learning for me. Guess what? It is. But in relationship with God, if these guys, these Jewish guys can learn this stuff and walk it out, you and I can walk this out. You can walk it out in South Africa. We can walk it out in America. We can walk it out in this generation. See, I have such great hope because my hope is in this, is that Jesus, and I want to get back to meekness, that Jesus demonstrated his meekness by not becoming offended by people's opinions. Jesus demonstrated his meekness by asking questions that other people were afraid to ask and being willing to receive the answer. And Jesus demonstrated by meekness by allowing his disciples to not know the right answer right away, by waiting on them. And he's super patient with you. If you don't get this right next week, he's okay with that. He just wants you to not give up because he's building something that the gates of hell cannot prevail against it. By the way, the promise is also the gates of hell will come against it. Like, hell's going to come against this revelation in your life. But guess what? If you stand on it, the gates of hell will not overcome this revelation in your life when it comes from the Father. Am I making sense to you? All right. I'm not sure even how to land this plane, but I'm going to ask for help. So, Holy Spirit, I don't even know what meekness really looks like other than what I see in this scripture. But I do know you said the meek will inherit the earth. And what we've been talking about is a renaissance in the earth, a transformation of the culture, the word becoming flesh. And God, I'm so desperate for your word to become flesh. I love what we do. I love the prophetic gift. I love the prophetic ministry. I even somewhat love prophetic conferences, but God, I just so much want to see your word become flesh. I so much want to see your word not just be a tool for entertainment, or I so much want to see your word not just be a tool for gathering crowds. I so much want to see your word to be a tool to transform lives and nations and cities, God, and I believe it can happen. And God, I thank you that you've been so gracious to us this week to give us such meat and such even joy in receiving that meat and such wisdom, God. God, I know that you won't give us that because you don't want us to have it. You said if anyone asks for wisdom, I will give to them liberally and I will not upbraid. That's what I hear the Lord say. He's not just giving us revelation. He's giving us more than we need, because what we need is for a generation. What we need is for a church. What we need is for a movement. And so when you've asked him for wisdom, he gives you liberally, and he does not upbraid, which means he doesn't criticize you for what you didn't have. He doesn't say, why didn't you know this before? Why didn't you get this before? Why did you wait so long to have the light bulb go on? No, he's blessed are you. Good job. You got this thing. And because you got this thing, I can build something on this thing. And God, I thank you. I thank you that you're high-fiving us today. You're high-fiving us today. You're saying, blessed are you. You got this straight from heaven, and heaven's going to help you walk it out. And God, we just position ourselves in meekness, because meekness is what's going to cause this word to become flesh in us. Because meekness is what's going to allow us to walk in greater authority. And we just declare right now to our opinions that you don't have the right to be offended. Even though you have the reality in our life because of our experience, we say we are not going to let our experience and our opinions cause offense that will keep us from truth and transformation and renaissance. And we just say right now to judgment that you have no place here. That yes, we have convictions and we have beliefs, but we just say that our convictions and our beliefs will not stem from a place of judgment of other people, what they've done to us, what they haven't done for us, what they've lacked, what they couldn't do for us, because God, their lack was based upon their lack of revelation. And so now, God, what we get to do is we get to flip it back on them, and we get to bless them. We get to bless them because we have a revelation that they didn't have, and we get to live out what they wanted to be, but they didn't know how to be. And so we just say, Father, that you're turning hearts of sons and daughters to fathers and mothers. That doesn't just mean that you're causing fathers and mothers to come to sons and daughters. It means that those of us who have positioned ourselves as sons and daughters to learn, you are turning the hearts of fathers to sons and daughters, and the hearts of sons and fathers to daughters. You're shifting hearts right now, God, and you're causing a generation that's been in a place of sonship and daughterhood to rise up and say, we're going to be fathers and mothers in this generation. We're going to be fathers and mothers in this generation, and because of it, the land will be restored. The curse in the land will be reversed. God, we thank you that we don't live under an old covenant with the threat that there'll be a curse in the land, but when a generation rises up of fathers and mothers and raises up a generation of sons and daughters that know who they are, our inheritance is released and the land is healed. And so, God, I thank you right now that judgment and offense leaves this place. And now we have the opportunity to stand in an open heaven before our Father and say, God, we're not content with just seeing the light. We're not content with just hearing or having a revelation. But God, we want to manifest truth in the earth. We want the truth. We want the word to become flesh in our lives. In Jesus' name.